guys. I hope you guys are doing great today. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're not, welcome back to the Everything Teen podcast. In this first episode of February, I interviewed Nick, who is an emergency doctor. We talked about his experience as a med student, dealing with mental and physical hardships, and I also gave him a few emergency situations in which he gave great advice for how to handle them. I also apologize in advance for the audio. It's not the best in a few places during the episode, but it's a great interview nonetheless. The fact of the week is that a cloud can weigh more than 1,000,000 pounds, which is just crazy because when I think of a cloud, I think it's just all fluffy and light, but it's actually the opposite. And as always, make sure to follow the podcast's Instagram at the everything.teen podcast for additional great content and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and as it always helps a lot. So now let's get into Nick's episode. I hope you enjoy. Hi, Nick. Welcome to the Everything Teen podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about your career as an emergency doctor. So could you start off by telling us, a bit about yourself, what you do, and why you chose to be an emergency doctor specifically?
Okay. I'm a dad, first and foremost. I have 3 little kids. I have tons of sisters, and I've been an emergency doctor for the last, I'd say, almost 10 years. And why the heck did I get into it? I do not know the answer to that question. Most people know right away. When I went to med school, all of my colleagues had a good sense that that was what they were going to do for most of their teen life.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea that that was what I was going to do until much later when my mom sent me a book that made me really interested in it. And that was after I'd done my first degree. And that's how I got into it ultimately, almost as a fling. Turned out to be a great move, but...
Like you said, you've been doing this for 10 years.
Yeah.
So you went to school and then you took a pause, or how did it work?
Yeah, I'll give you the rundown. So I did high school, then CEGEP, 2 years of CEGEP. Then I did my undergrad degree in kinesiology at Concordia. So that's 3 years.
And what's kinesiology?
Kinesiology is like sports medicine or exercise science.
Well, that's interesting.
And then I didn't know what to do with myself, so I took a year off. The beginning of that year, I was working in a science lab doing experiments for one of my professors, and I realized I really didn't like doing that. So after I'd finished that, I booked a plane ticket to Australia because, it's part of the Commonwealth, and you didn't need a visa. You can go down there and work. So I had no idea what I was doing, and I thought that'd be a great idea. And that was in September, so we were turning into fall, and in Australia, it's the opposite, and they were turning into spring. So I thought, perfect timing. And it's when I left there that my mom had given me that book and sort of said, you should apply to medicine. And then halfway through that, I got a letter that said I had to do these interviews. So I had to cut my trip short. And then I came home and I did a bunch of interviews. Some went well, some went not so well. And then I did med school.
Nice. And what was like the course of your education like as a student and your experience overall?
In all honesty, I was not a very good student in high school. I did okay in high school. Some things were easy for me and some things were really hard. And the easy things I did well. I think I was really good in math. I did pretty well in sciences too. That wasn't really challenging. It was easy for me to do. It was the French and English classes and more social sciences that I had a lot of trouble with. So I didn't do very well in high school. And then I went to CEGEP, and my first semester in CEGEP, I did awful. I even failed a class. It was so bad. But it was also the first time in my life where I had a serious girlfriend. Her name was Gab, and she was super smart and loved school. So like on a Saturday night, if, she's studying, well, I guess I started to study myself. So then I started getting good grades. And then university rolled around, and sort of on the same lines, I met one of my best friends in university who happened to be also very academically gifted. And again, because he was so driven to do really well, I kind of latched on to his coattails and ended up doing really well. And in university also. I don't know. Was that answering your question? I'm not too
Well,
sure
like
what.
your experience in med school, like how was the training like?
And then I got it. So then I finally got into med school. And the thing about my med school is that it was a very different school. It was an alternative med school where we learned by problem-based education, meaning they would give us a case and then we'd learn all around it, as opposed to some teacher in front of you lecturing you for 6 hours.
Yeah.
It was small group learning. So in the beginning it was actually really hard. Then you get used to it. The challenging part is that you never really know if you know what you're supposed to know, because you're teaching yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not somebody else telling you what you're supposed to know. So it leaves you sort of feeling like, I don't know what I'm supposed to know. But it also makes you better, because then you always try to learn more.
Mm-hmm.
And when you learn things yourself, you tend to know it better than if somebody just tells it to you and you memorize it for that one small period. So my med school experience was great. I loved it. It was a lot of fun. It was actually probably the funnest time I've ever had at school.
Well, that's good, because someone I interviewed, they also didn't really enjoy high school. And so when they really got to stage up in university and got to choose what they wanted to do, that they really excelled. And so my next question for you is, what's the process of starting to work in a hospital? Do they recruit you? Do you apply, or does the government like assign positions? How does that work?
So it's different across the country. So once you finish med school, you're not done yet. You have to do residency, meaning you then choose the specialty of medicine that you want to practice. And that is actually quite competitive. So you do have an application process, and depending on the specialty, you may get it, or if there are lots of people who want it, you may not get it. Anyway, assuming that you do get what you want, you then have a residency period that's anywhere between 2 to 7 years of more training. And then once you're done, you kind of can go anywhere in Canada and practice. And most of the time, places are happy to have you, because there's usually a shortage of physicians everywhere.
So how many years of med school did you do?
So my med school is 3 years. Most med schools are 4 years. And then I did about 4 years of residency afterwards.
And what exactly is an emergency doctor? How does that?
Okay, so to get into the hospital, the emergency room is the gateway for that. So if ever anybody's acutely ill, meaning that you have something that's going on in your body that's really bad, you need to be seen right away. We're the first line people that you're going to see.
Mm-hmm.
So we have access to rapid tests, whether that's blood tests or x-rays, and we can get them done pretty instantaneously. And then we also are able to make those diagnoses relatively rapidly for you. And on certain occasions, we can intervene too. Like if you have a broken bone that needs to be reset, we can usually pop it back into the right alignment, put a cast in.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have trouble breathing, so we can put them on a respirator. There's a whole variety of stuff. I guess what we would be considered is kind of the jack of all trades in medicine. We have to know a lot of different fields, but not exactly everything about each one of them, just the most emergent parts.
Yeah, like do you have a specific role within emergency?
So each member of the emergency team generally brings their own attributes to the department. So mine happens to be ultrasound utilization. So there's this tool called an ultrasound that has developed to the point where you can actually create images on your iPhone using a little probe that looks into the body, and it's called an ultrasound machine. And I've kind of developed a sort of specialty in that, and that's, I think, why they hired me at my job, to be there to sort of run that program or run that part of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, why did you choose to be an emergency doctor?
Oh boy,
because there's so many
fields. It was definitely not my first choice when I started. When I first started, I thought I wanted to be a surgeon. I wanted to operate. Specifically, I wanted to be a bone surgeon, orthopedic surgeon. I thought that was really cool.
I wanted to be a spinal surgeon, like
Spine
neural.
Oh man,
because I was really into neuroscience. So I was like, I want to, and then I searched it up, and the money was quite good, and I was like, okay. But then I saw into the years of and I was like, hell no, I'm not doing that.
Of them all.
Yeah,
but they're the smartest.
Yeah, but it's too much, and even with blood and stuff, and I get so stressed out.
It is definitely you have to be okay with seeing blood if you're going to be a surgeon.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I didn't want to do it also for that reason. I
Mhm.
wasn't really willing to do that many years of residency. Not that I was in a rush to do anything, but I felt like that was a bit daunting. And then I started doing more and more rotations in medicine and liking basically each one of them.
Mhm.
And then emergency medicine sort of meant that I could actually have little parts of each one of those subspecialties because I had to know about each one of them. Even though I wasn't a specialist in any one of them, it sort of allowed me to practice a more uh, wide range of medicine as opposed to really tailoring or focusing on one thing. And then there was another part of it that was also exciting in the sense that when you work in emergency medicine, you come in, you have a problem, I fix it right away, or I try to anyway. So
Yeah.
there's an immediacy about it that is very satisfying. And then there was a social component too. So unlike a surgeon who has to be at the hospital every morning at 5 o'clock in the morning, when you do emergency medicine, you can do shifts, and you can do a lot of shifts in a short amount of time and then book yourself off. So there's a greater variability. And I'm really not a like 9 to 5 kind of guy. I did
Yeah.
not like that. And I like the idea of working evenings and nights. And it sort of made my schedule a little bit varied, which I liked a lot.
And talking about schedules, how does yours look like roughly?
Roughly speaking, I work around at least 12 shifts a month. So that's 12 clinical shifts a month. Most of the time, it's more than that. The shifts are either day shifts, evening shifts, or overnight shifts. I tend to do mostly overnight shifts.
Do you prefer those?
I do like it because it's quieter. It's usually only me that's around, but it is kind of hard because your sleep schedule is totally messed up.
And is it creepy in the hospital?
It's definitely not creepy in the
Oh,
hospital.
because
No,
I would expect it to be creepy during
it's
the
so not
night.
creepy. It's so well lit. Like there's no
Okay.
windows in my emergency.
Okay,
I don't
never
even know the
mind
difference.
then. So, like, if you could have, is that like your ideal schedule, or is there still some things you would tweak? Like, how would it look like your perfect ideal schedule?
I used to have a much easier time answering that question because I didn't have kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I had kids, it became really hard because they're off on the weekend,
Mm-hmm.
and I often have to work on the weekend. So my ideal schedule would be never having to work weekends anymore,
Yeah.
even though before that was never a problem for me. But that's just not part of the game. You have to work or at least be available half of the weekends. So
Do
that's
you
going to turn out to be hard,
do you get
especially when they
like
get older.
emergency calls from the hospital telling you to come
No,
ever?
that's the other nice thing about doing emergency medicine. Once you're on, you're on. But once you're done, you're done. You walk
Mm-hmm.
away and you don't really get called in.
It's not the same to being like a specific surgeon and if
Exactly, where
someone
you hold
comes
a
in with,
pager. Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to do that.
And talking about your kids, like how is that having 3 little children at the same time of having a full-time high stress job?
Uh, it's fabulous. It's hard in the sense that you always want to be there for your kids, but you feel some sort of, well, not feel, you have some professional obligations that you're also
Uh-huh.
responsible for. So finding a work-life balance becomes hard and frustrating because you want to be there more often than you actually are. But luckily, I have a really great life partner who makes
Mm-hmm.
my life great and our lives together great and having kids together great. And as much as she supports me, I flip it around and try to support her. As you know, she's gone for the last 4 weeks.
Yeah.
She has another type of
How
job
has
that's
that been?
demanding. Exhausting. I'm not gonna lie, it's really tiring.
Yeah,
But it's
man.
cool too because you develop a sort of different relationship with your kids that
Mm-hmm.
you don't have when your other partner's around.
Well, and how do you guys make it work with very busy schedules?
Planning. We often end up spending hours looking at our schedule and figuring out who's working when and how we can make sure that there's always at least one of us around for the kids. It's a
Yeah,
lot of planning, which is not cool, but
obviously.
whatever.
And how do you cope with the stress, mental and physical fatigue, etc.?
I think a lot of people have very different ways of coping with it because it's certainly not a non-stressful job. It's really quite stressful. I cope by Well, essentially through exercise. I run a lot, as you know. I used to be able to run absolutely every single day. Now it's a little bit harder with kids, obviously, but even then, I
Yeah.
try to put them into a chariot and make them run with me. I think they like it, but
Yeah.
that's how I cope. I do a lot of, or at least I try anyway, physical activity, which I feel like helps me have a little moment where I can be with my own thoughts
Yeah.
and expend some energy that maybe sort of is negative in my body, you know?
Have you ever been close to like meltdowns, and how have you like tried to calm that down and get back to work and focus?
I don't think there'd be anybody who's in my line of work that would ever answer no to that question. I think we all get confronted by stressful situations, and we deal with them in different ways. And I'm just trying to be honest and almost politically correct about answering it. One strategy that I've sort of tried to incorporate is to be sure that when a difficult scenario happens and we go through it and get over it, at the end of it, as a team, come together and take a moment, even if it's just a few minutes, to pause and reflect on how we thought that process just happened, and if anybody had any insight on how we can do it better maybe in the future. Or not even necessarily do something better, but just to comment on how they thought that whole sort of scene was run. And I think that's applicable to not just medicine, but to a whole bunch of things. Taking time, and again, even if it's a small moment, to reflect and have feedback, either to yourself or among others, can be really beneficial to a lot of scenarios, whether they be stressful or emotionally difficult or sad or hard, you know?
Yeah. Does it get any easier over time?
You This sounds callous. You kind of get used to it. So when I first started, it was incredibly challenging because you get put into really scary situations over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And it's not like you're dealing with, you know, a little book or something. It's actually somebody's life that's right in front of you. So it gets really tough. But you eventually kind of get used to it. Not used to it because you never really do get used to it, but it becomes almost part of you in a weird way, which is hard to explain, but it does become easier in the end. And I think that's probably true for anybody who's got a tough job. It's
Yeah.
probably really tough in the beginning for anything, and then you kind of get the swing of things. Do you feel like you got the swing of things yet?
Sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes I feel really like good and like I know what I'm doing, and then other times I just can't take even like when you're talking about like your situation, I feel like stupid for thinking that these things are overwhelming in my life, but it is true that I guess it depends on your mindset at that moment.
I think it's all relative.
Yeah.
Here's an example. Like the first time you made a cake, were you good at it?
I don't remember, but probably not.
Nah, probably not. I'm sure you were awful.
Yeah.
But eventually you made a lot, and now your
Yeah.
cakes are killer.
Thank
You
you.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. I'm not saying I'm a killer emergency doctor. I'm just saying after a while, you kind
You
of get
get used to it.
used to it and better at it, hopefully.
And like, what's your favorite part of your job?
You get to be part of a person's often most dramatic moment, and they open up to you and they don't even know you. And that's a really rare event in any circumstance. So we're really privileged to be able to have that relationship with people. It's really the people aspect of it that's the most
Yeah.
rewarding.
I feel like a lot of people that I interview say that. The
Yeah,
people.
that's nice to hear.
Yeah. And what's your least favorite part?
Oh, the people. Some of them can be really hard, and
Yeah.
especially in moments of either vulnerability or pain, they can act in ways that are not particularly nice. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
They can be really difficult and challenging. You know, that's sort of the yin to the yang, I guess.
And if you couldn't be a doctor, what would you be? What
Man,
would you like to...
It's great. There's a bunch of things that I think are really cool and interesting. My two best friends are both architects, and I've always told myself, I thought I would love to do what they do. I think there's something really fundamentally cool about creating space and doing it beautifully and functionally. Found really interesting. I love when they tell me about their jobs or what it is that they're
You
working
can
on in
listen
terms
to
of their
one of my
projects.
episodes.
You interview an architect. Perfect. That's probably going to be my top choice. Would I be a good one? No, I don't think so. I think I wouldn't be good.
Like
but
you said, over time,
maybe
you
over time.
probably
Yeah,
would be
maybe.
good.
I don't know. But the cookie didn't crumble that way.
Yeah. Or do you have any regrets?
I have no regrets at all.
So now I want to try something different than any other episode, and I thought it would be cool to give you situations, like going out with friends and something happens and what you should do before the paramedics arrive. So I have 3 of these for you. So the first one is you're out on a hike with your friends and suddenly Bob gets attacked by a stray dog and he bites his leg like really hard and he starts bleeding a lot. And the paramedics, it's on a mountain, it's very high, and they won't be there for another hour. What do you do?
Okay, so the principle with bleeding wounds, or exsanguination, like we call it, is to control proximally, which means control closer to the body. So let's say you got bit on your calf. You would try to tightly wrap the calf with whatever you have. So take a shirt off or whatever you want and try to tightly wrap it as much as you possibly can, either at the site of the wound itself, but if that doesn't work, go up towards the knee and underneath the knee, or somewhere up on the leg, and tightly wrap it as much as you can with what's called a tourniquet. So like take a piece of cloth, wrap it around the knee, and then put a stick in between the two and then twist it around with the stick, which gives you more leverage in terms of being able to twist. So that it essentially cuts off the blood supply to the part of the limb below it.
And if Bob is screaming in pain and he's like just in agony, like what do you do with him?
There's not much you can do unless you had some medications, unfortunately. For the pain, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about it.
And what would you do with the stray dog?
The stray dog?
If he kept
I'm not a vet.
I know, but okay, so let's say it was Nick in that situation.
If there was a stray dog,
what would you do?
My God, I would honestly try to defend myself as hard as I possibly could. So if there's any object around me, I would literally take a stick and just try to defend myself as best as I possibly could. I think there's probably powers in numbers. Like in your scenario, there was more than just me walking in the woods, right?
It was your friends.
So there was multiple of us?
Yeah.
Let's all gang up
on it.
What
if they're all like really weak and there's some like plan where that's why they're going on a hike because they're just trying to get fit, but they're actually super not fit?
Well, let me take a crack at this, even though I'm not any good. I'm assuming dogs don't climb trees very well.
Yeah.
And so one option would be to just climb a tree, and then you could ultimately get away from it.
Yeah. What would you do with Bob? He would be on the ground.
Wow, you just told me that they're unfit. Too bad for that.
Okay, so my second situation. Now we're gonna leave Bob behind. And
okay, poor Bob.
Let the paramedics.
Poor Bob. I feel bad for Bob.
You're going on a swim in a lake with a family member, and they hit their head on a rock.
Oh no.
Yes, but they come out and they say they're fine, but they're very dizzy. They have a bump on their head, and they look like they're about to faint. What do you do? And you don't know if they have water in their lungs or any of that stuff.
Well, if they're talking to you and they're not like coughing or complaining of difficulty breathing, they probably don't have any water in their lungs. That's a pretty easy one. People who either inhale water or are actually in the process of drowning are a totally different topic. But if you bump your head pretty significantly on a rock and you're not feeling well, the probably most important thing to do is to leave that lake and go to a hospital and get checked out. Especially if you're feeling really rotten, you're about to pass out. There's a few key things that we talk about when we ask people when they hit their head to determine if they need a CT scan. So one of them is...
What's a CT scan?
That's where you do a X-ray of your head to look for bleeding on the inside, because really that's what we worry about when you hit your head.
Yeah.
If you're what we call altered, meaning that you're not normal in your behavior. So either you're not talking or you're very confused, and that lasts for a long period of time. That's not a really good sign. If you're vomiting, that's also usually not a really good sign. Invariably, if you're not feeling really well, you should ultimately just go get checked out and get somebody to lay eyes on you.
But would you just like tell them to sit down if they couldn't move?
You mean right after they got out of the water?
Yeah, like if like I don't have a car or something and they're coming, like would you just tell them to sit down? Is there some certain position that they should take?
No, there's no particular position, just anyone that makes them comfortable. But I agree with you. Probably lying down is probably going to be a better thing for them. Yeah.
And so you're going on a romantic picnic with your girlfriend.
Awesome. I like the
But
scenario.
then there's food poisoning. She gets food poisoning. And what would you do in that situation?
Where are we? In a restaurant?
No, on a picnic in the mountains. And you walked really far, and then she's not feeling good. She's puking all over the place. Let's not think about how she got the food poisoning.
Fair enough. But she's puking.
Yes.
Poor girl. All right. Well, physiologically speaking, when you have food poisoning and you puke, that's your body trying to get all of that junk out of the body because it's not good. So the physiological process itself is normal, is to be expected. The only thing you can do, though, is wait with time for it to get better as it's going to go through your system. If she was feeling rotten and still puking, I'd probably literally piggyback her back home, get her into bed. And the treatment for it when you're having gastroenteritis or when you go from puking to then having lots of diarrhea, like nobody ever really dies of that. It's not the puking or the diarrhea that matters, is because you become dehydrated afterwards, meaning that you don't have enough water in your system and then your body starts to shut down. So you need to get hydrated again. So the key is to get water back into your stomach.
Oh.
So small little sips is the key. That's what I tell people. Little sips of water.
What happens
over
if
and
you
over
just
and over again?
Chug it.
Oh, it's going to expand your stomach really quickly. Your stomach's going to get really mad and it'll just puke it right back up.
Okay, so small sips,
Small
guys.
sips over and over again every 5 minutes.
Okay, well, that was the situations.
Cool.
Hopefully you'll learn this. Maybe you're listening to this podcast while you're like on a hike or something.
Puking.
And if you have a friend called Bob, well, be careful of him. So now I always end my episode with 2 questions. So the first one is, what advice would you give to a teenager who wants to be a doctor in the future, or more specifically, an emergency doctor?
I might give maybe a little bit of an atypical answer to this. I would suggest, if you're going to get into medicine, make sure that you have as much good and fun and important life experience beforehand, because I think that really helps, both in terms of the fact that when you go into medicine, you're going to be going to school for a long period of time, and it's going to be a very intense moment of your life, so you won't get to often socialize as much as you normally will. But 2, I think it's a really important feature when you have a doctor in front of you. It's nice to know that they have some sense of humanity within them also. So try to go out there and garner as many experiences as possible, and I think that'll be really helpful to you as a human, which ultimately will make you a better doctor.
And finally, what advice would you give to teens in general?
Oh boy. Oh man, being a teen's really hard. I remember it being really tough because I didn't know who I was and kind of had an idea of what I wanted to be, but even then didn't know. And then what I realized is that it so doesn't matter, because you turn out to be who you are anyway. So my advice would be to not sweat it, and just be nice. Does that work?
Yeah, that's a good answer.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for being on the Everything Teen podcast, and have a nice day.
Thanks for having me.
So that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Email me at the everythingteenpodcast@gmail.com if you have any thoughts, comments, or business inquiries. Don't forget to leave that review on Spotify to support the pod and hit that subscribe button on YouTube to get notified for new episodes. And don't forget about the podcast's Instagram account at the everything.teen podcast. And if you like what you heard, stay tuned for the next episode where I talk to another person about their career. See you soon.